Hello, friends, and welcome to this week's edition of Aydt Picks. Um, Trying to go live on YouTube um, from my broadcasts, and for those of you who have not seen Aydt Picks before, those of you who aren't my friends on Facebook, uh, I've done Aydt Picks for several years now, and it's something I really enjoy doing. I'm a Florida grad. My dad played football for Florida, and the University of Florida is basically in my DNA. It's always been my dream to uh, have a college football show, and I'm testing the waters. My show is watched by a lot of people on uh, on my Facebook channel, and I figure why not try to start it up as a hobby? It worked for people like Josh Pate. Um, so who knows where this can go? And I hope you all enjoy my content. And I'm going to let you know ahead of time that although I'm a Florida Gators fan and I follow the team, I am harsh on them. And unlike some people, I tell it like it is. If Florida's not doing good, I'm not going to sugarcoat things. I'm going to say what's on my mind. That's just who I am. And I think it's going to be good for streaming and people and sports shows all across the internet, all across the world, to have people that tell it like it is, like me. And I'll tell you my opinions, but my opinions aren't Homer opinions, if that makes sense. And I don't do it to make people happy or anything else. Like I said, I can't reiterate enough that I tell it like it is. And I think people will appreciate that in the long run. I've followed college football my whole life. It's not a new thing for me. I love it. I loved it even before the NIL and money started taking over the sport. And so the way my show usually works is I'll preview the weekend's upcoming games, and I will tell you who I think, in the top 25. I'll pick all of the top 25 games, and then I'll pick all of the Division One schools in Florida, in addition to um, sorry about that. In addition to a bonus game, and then whether Florida is ranked or not, because Florida's my team, I'll pick them also. And as time goes on, I'm sure I have to, as more popular as the show gets, I'll have to stop highlighting Florida as much, to appeal to the wider demographic, and I get that, but I'm not going to be shy about my love for Florida. I'm going to be honest. And like I wanted to reiterate again, I'm not going to be a homer. I'm going to tell you if Florida sucks. I'm going to tell you if I think the coach should be fired or that he's doing well. Like, for example, last year when Napier was on the hot seat, I didn't sugarcoat that. I thought he should have been fired after the Texas A&M game. I'm glad he turned things around and Florida's looking great now. But if I was the athletic director, his butt would have been fired after the third game. And in addition to my picks, I try to start off with an interesting topic. This week I'm kind of feeling it out and having um, an introduction to the wider audience. Like last week, I picked the loudest stadiums I've been to in order, and I have a fun and interesting topic. Sometimes several ones, sometimes my opinion on things or certain games. I'll also recap the biggest stories from last week and uh, before I do my picks. In the week before, I also did a segment on the greatest teams in college football history that I've ever seen. Fun things like that I'll do. Um, so I'm going to start by recapping last week's big games. Who impressed me? FSU impressed me, but then again, let's talk about Alabama for a second. Uh, the Saban swagger has worn off. It's gone. And if Kalen DeBoer doesn't turn things around quick, he's going to be selling his house in Tuscaloosa. Let's just be honest about that. Those Bama boosters and fans have no patience to be mediocre in the SEC. They were spoiled's not a good word. They they're Saban set a standard at Bama. Let's just say that, and DeBoer will never fill those shoes. He's pretty much a dead man walking. Hats off to Florida State, but the trouble started to begin last year, and then there's major cracks in the foundation that are beyond repair. You can tell that by the discipline in the players and game preparation that their focus just wasn't how it should be for Alabama standard, if that makes sense. Uh, Kids were listening to headphones and whatever kind of music, uh, and jamming on their iPhones, and it's not the focus that Saban set in place. And I noticed that difference. I noticed that Bama doesn't play hard like they used to, and they got to figure out their quarterback situation. So, but give all credit to Florida State. This week they're gonna match their win total from last year. So, give a lot of credit to Mike Norvell and Gus Malzahn for pointing that program, getting it headed back in the right direction. Um, Also, we saw how far the Manning hype was taken, and that goes to show how much pressure was on the young man just for having that last name. Um, to be honest, I don't think he gets recruited as heavily if his last name didn't carry him. And we saw evidence of that last week versus Ohio State. No, I think, does Texas clean it up? I think so, yeah. For most teams, this week is a cleanup week. There's hardly any big games, and I think the biggest one is the one College Game Day is going to, which is at Oklahoma, and you have Michigan coming to Oklahoma to play them, and I'll preview that game later. But I'll start off at the Horseshoe with the number one team in the land, and that is the Ohio State Buckeyes playing Grambling. Ohio State should cakewalk through this. Heck, their second string guys will probably be in by halftime. If I had to guess, I think Ohio State wins this game big. I think they win it by the score of 63-10. I've got, for the next game, we got a Happy Valley. We've got Penn State versus FIU. I've got Penn State clobbering FIU by a score of 73-0. Same deal as Ohio State. Penn State clobbers their opponent. Number 3 team in the land, the LSU Tigers. They looked impressive last week versus Clemson. Um, their defense is much improved. I'm not so sure about Nussmeier, but that was a much more low scoring game than I had thought. Um, LSU looks good, and I don't know what to think. I'm going to Baton Rouge next week for Florida versus LSU. I'm looking forward to that, and should be a good time. But LSU plays La Tech. They're in-state. I don't know if I would call it a rival, but it's another in-state team. They shouldn't struggle. I've got LSU with the win over La Tech. Both score 42-13. Number 4, Georgia, the Dogs. They play Austin Peay, and Georgia's gonna poop on Austin Peay. Um, they, as long as George is there, Kirby Smart, or as long as Kirby Smart is at Georgia, they're gonna have an outstanding defense. I don't think it changes this week in a tune-up game versus Austin Peay. I think that they dominate Austin Peay. Both score 45-0. Number 5, the U has Bethune-Cookman coming in. They shouldn't struggle there. If they do, then they're in a world of trouble. But that was another impressive win last week when they beat Notre Dame. I thought Notre Dame was going to win, but I don't know if we can say the U is back, but they sure looked impressive in beating Notre Dame. And it looks like the Big Three might be back in the state of Florida, which is good for college football. But I've got Miami over Bethune by a score of 83-7. This next game, Oregon plays Ohio State up at Outson Zoo. I've never been to that stadium, but I want to go sometime. I hear it's a great environment and it's extremely loud. Oregon, everybody wants to be high on Dan Lanning. I don't have anything against the guy, but I don't think he's proven as a head coach. And what I mean by that is Oregon recruits for itself by virtue of Phil Knight, the CEO and founder of Nike, is a graduate, is an alum of Oregon. And so even prior to NIL, Nike was a major recruiting deal for Oregon, like because those kids got free Nike apparel and gear and all that privately funded by Phil Knight, and of course he is the sponsor for their athletic department. And now think of all the endorsement deals that they get by virtue of Nike and the money that they make. So I'd pump the brakes on Dan Lanning, because every time you hear a major coaching vacancy come up, everybody's always like, "Oh, Dan Lanning, Dan Lanning." Yeah, he's won at Oregon, but who wouldn't win at Oregon? Like, Nike gets those athletes. I mean, to me, he's still unproven. He hasn't won a championship or anything. Um, he's had winning seasons, yeah, but Oregon's been good since Chip Kelly was there, and even before then. Oregon's always going to do good because of Nike. I don't know if they'll ever win a national championship, but as long as Phil Knight's alive and keeps pumping money into that program, and yeah, Oregon's going to be able to recruit. But anyway, to the game, Oklahoma State has developed a winning culture under Mike Gundy. The past few years, they've kind of slid back, but Gundy's won the majority of the time that he's been there, and he's competed for Big 12 titles, and at one time he was even in the national championship picture, relevant. Um, they always screw up by losing Bedlam or a game that they shouldn't, but uh, a lot of people look at this game and think, oh, Oregon's going to dominate them, but I think it's closer than what the experts think. I don't think that they'll crush them by any means. I still think it's going to be a dominant Oregon win, but it'll be close early. I think Oregon wins by a score of 31-10. Number 7, Texas. They play San Jose State. Arch Manning gets to make up. He gets to avenge himself for last week. Texas gets a win. They beat San Jose State easily by a score of 55-3. Moving on, number 8 Clemson in the same boat. They get a game to make up for last week's loss. They play Troy. They shouldn't struggle. They win 35-6. Number 10 South Carolina, who I think is a little bit overrated. Lenore Sellers good, and although that they had a good win last week versus Virginia Tech, I don't really know how good South Carolina is. I don't think that they're a top 10 team. But I definitely think that they're decent and they're competitive, and Lenore Sellers is a great quarterback. But like I said, I don't know if they're exactly top 10 worthy. It remains to be seen. They play South Carolina State this weekend. And they shouldn't have any struggles versus South Carolina State. I think they win by the score of 51-10, tune-up game. For my upset pick of the week, I've got Illinois, number 11, going into Wallace Wade Stadium in Durham, North Carolina. I've got Duke defeating Illinois in an overtime game on a field goal by a score of 27-24. I honestly don't. I think Illinois is overrated too, just because they had a victory, and I think it was versus South Carolina in the bowl game last year. And Bielema knows what he's doing as a head coach enough to be relevant, to make a team relevant. But I don't know if I would have Illinois as high as 11. Moving on, I have number 12, Arizona State, going to Starkville, Mississippi, and playing the Bulldogs. Classic. Mississippi State is one of the SEC bottom feeders, sadly. However, they are playing at home with the Cowbells, but they traditionally don't do that well versus teams out of conference at the beginning of the year. I think Arizona State goes in there. I think it might be a close game until the third quarter, and I think Arizona State pulls away. Kenny Dillingham, their coach, is a great coach, especially in the offensive mind. Arizona State's generally really good offensively. They have been for years, going back to the Jake Plummer days in the 90s. And Dillingham's got it going there, especially last year with Cam Scattaboo. They were fun to watch. They made the playoffs and almost beat Texas. That was fun to watch. I've got, with that being said, I think they pull away from Mississippi State and they beat Mississippi State by the score of 44-24. On to the swamp. Florida plays South Florida coming up from Tampa. I don't know if I'd call this game a rivalry, especially since this is the fourth time these two have met in the history of South Florida's program, which is less than 30 years old. I think that program began in '96, which, interestingly enough, was the year Florida won their first national championship in college football. Um, and if you're talking about a rivalry, there needs to be some bad blood between the two. I'd say UCF is more of a rivalry for Florida than USF is, because their fans don't talk shit like UCF fans do. Plus, UCF actually has a victory over Florida, even though Florida's 3-1 versus them total. South Florida, however, is, I'm gonna say, is arguably, no, not even arguably, they're better coached X and O's than Florida is. Florida just has better talent because Billy Napier is a better recruiter and a better developer of players. Actually, that's arguable too, but in terms of development of players, but um, South Florida's coach, he knows X and O's. Was the offensive coordinator under Josh Heupel at Tennessee. His name's Goulash, I think, something like that. South Florida's coach. But he has them headed in the right direction. The past few years, they gave Alabama all they could handle and more. So Florida better be ready to play Saturday. Napier's boneheaded when it comes to on-field decision making and play calling. Hopefully he has that cleaned up, because if he doesn't, we could be in for a real dogfight, especially if they're hanging with us late in the game. However, I think this game is close initially. I'd say probably until about halftime, and then I think it'll be 17-17 at halftime. A lot of the Gator fans that don't know much about college football will be freaking out, thinking, oh my gosh, they're going to beat us. And they may very well beat us. I'm not predicting upset, but I'm saying it could happen if Bonehead Billy doesn't do a few right things here and there, doesn't make the right adjustments. But I think that the depth of Florida will pull away, depth and experience of Florida and their athletes will pull away from South Florida in the third and fourth quarter, and we'll end up beating them 34-24. And Gator fans will rest assured, with like 5 minutes left in the game, they can take a sigh of air and breathe. Florida wins over South Florida by a score of 34-24, getting us prepared to go into Baton Rouge next week, in one of the tougher places to play in all of college football. I've got number 14, Florida's second-rate University, coming off their impressive win last week versus Alabama. They shouldn't struggle. They beat East Texas A&M by the score of 77-6. Next game is the matchup of the corn-fed boys. The battle for Iowa. I don't know if there's a trophy for that or not. I'll have to study for it, but it's Iowa and Iowa State going head-to-head. Now, historically, Iowa hasn't been good since Matt Campbell has become their head coach. But he's got that program lately headed in the right direction, and I actually picked Kansas State to beat them in Ireland, but I was wrong. They ended up beating Kansas State, and they're 2-0. Iowa has the longest tenured head coach in college football. And Kirk Ferentz, he's been there since the early 2000s, maybe even late 90s. I have to look that up. But I know he's the longest tenured head coach. And he's made them competitive. He's never won a natty there, but he's given them seasons of like 10 wins of quite a few times, and he's beat Florida's butt. He's gotten them to New Year's Six bowl games several times. Beat Florida's butt one of the years in the Citrus Bowl or Outback Bowl, whichever one. But yeah, he's done good things in his time at Iowa, and I think his biggest mistake was letting his son be offensive coordinator because they sucked for a long time and had the very few. They averaged like 7 points a game for like 2 years, but they played great defense. But with that being said, I think this is a close contest, and Iowa State wins, I should say. They hit a 53-yard field goal in the waning seconds of the game to win the game by the score of 9-6 over their hated rivals from Iowa City. I got number 17, SMU. We're going to go to Dallas, Texas. Baylor Bears coming up from Waco, which is about an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on which part of Dallas you go to. Yeah, I've got SMU cruising in that game. They shouldn't struggle with Baylor. SMU wins by the score of 44-27. I've got number 19. And for the next game, we fly southeast a few hours to College Station, where the Texas A&M Aggies, ranked number 19, play the Utah State Aggies. So we have the Texas Aggies versus the Utah Aggies. The battle for the Aggies in College Station at Kyle Field. And in the battle for the Aggies, A&M wins, Texas A&M, by the score of 37-14, notching Mike Elko's second win of the year. Number 20, Ole Miss. Hoity-toity, good God Almighty, the Rockin' Rebels, led by Lane Kiffin, head up to Lexington, Kentucky, in horse country, where they will face the Stoops brother, Mark Stoops. And they will defeat them by the score of 23-14, notching Lane Kiffin his second victory of the year. The Kentucky, as well as Stoops, has coached them over the years. He's hit a ceiling with them. I think he has a job there for life, considering all he's done at the program and taking them to new levels, and then ending the 30-plus year streak of losing to Florida. Yeah, they might as well name the field after him instead of after a grocery store. Maybe that'll come one day. I'm surprised, though, that nobody's poached him from Kentucky, honestly, because he's a legit head coach. Like, he knows defense and he knows what to do to make a great team. I mean, it's in his blood. Coaching's in his blood. He's a Stoops. So he must really love Kentucky, because I could see him working out at a lot of other colleges. But he's wanted to stay at Kentucky. Like, at every big coaching hire that comes up, his name is mentioned. But he must love the Wildcats for whatever reason. But yeah, I got Ole Miss beating them 23-14. Moving on. Number 21, Alabama. They play Louisiana Monroe, which, interestingly enough, was one of the games that Nick Saban lost in his first year. Um, as the tide were rising, they played uh, Louisiana Monroe, and as they're falling, they're playing Louisiana Monroe. When they're rising, they lost to Louisiana Monroe. Now that they're falling, I think that they notch a win. Uh, I got number 21, Alabama. It feels so weird saying a rank for Alabama and having them 21 or putting them at the bottom of my countdown or my picks. It doesn't feel like it should be, like I'm not used to having Alabama uh, this far down. Yeah, this is weird. But they beat Louisiana Monroe, both score 62-20. I've got number 22, Tennessee. Good old Rocky Top, Tennessee. That place is going to be rocking Saturday. They're going to pound East Tennessee State. They'll score 65-7. Got number 23, Indiana. They play one of the easiest schedules in the nation. They play all cupcakes. If not the easiest, it's one of the easiest. But they shouldn't struggle with Kennesaw State. They beat them both, score 49-13. I've got number 24, Texas Tech, playing Kent State. Somebody brought up a good point, and I was reading it somewhere that this day and age in NIL, Texas Tech, because of the oil money and the donors and all that oil-rich money with the present day and age of NIL, Texas Tech is supposed to be on the forefront of college athletics. If things keep going the way that they do, they will, because athletes follow that. Unfortunately, they don't follow loyalty anymore. But Texas Tech is supposed to see a major boost in all their sports. We're already seeing it in basketball, as they were one Florida comeback from making a Final Four. And yeah, they're going to get better in football too, because money talks when it comes to, you're basically buying players. It's like a professional league system. I don't like it, but I can go into that another time. Some of you have already heard my spiel. For those who haven't, I'll go into it another time. But bring me back classic college football, man. The sport that I grew up loving. But yeah, I got Texas Tech over Kent State by a score 52-13. And now we're moving out to Salt Lake City. And we got number 25, Utah. They play Cal Poly. They beat them by a score of 35-3. For my bonus pick of the week, we've got a rivalry, a traditional college football rivalry that hasn't been played since 2011. Missouri and Kansas. This used to be a huge rivalry that I think was played for over 100 years before Missouri went to the SEC. It stinks when traditional college rivalries have to get ended like that for whatever reason. But I believe this is the first time they're playing since that rivalry was put on hold. With that being said, I think Kansas is improving under Lance Leopold, but I think Missouri now knows what it's like to be a solid SEC team, and they're tougher than the Big 12, and I think they've got better athletes as well. So I've got Missouri in this game over Kansas. Both score 35-24. It's good to see a classic rivalry renewed. As for the other D1 Florida schools, we've got UCF in action over North Carolina A&T. UCF wins, both score 41-7. And Florida Atlantic plays host to FAMU and Boca Raton. They barely get past the best team in Tallahassee. Both score 27-20 in overtime. This concludes my picks this week. Y'all be safe. If you're gonna drive, don't drink. If you're gonna drink, don't drive. Enjoy the week. This tune-up weekend of college football. Lots more big games next week. Be safe. Y'all take care and God bless. Aydt signing off.